another episode of Do What You Love. I'm Jeff Kirkshin, and we were off a little bit there because I drove across the country and started a new job at WXTU here in Philadelphia, my new home. I'm coming to you from my guest bedroom with an amazing guest. So the first person to be in my guest bedroom is not actually a guest staying with me, but it's somebody on my podcast. Ariel Epstein is with me. Hi, good morning, afternoon, whatever time it is, whatever time you're listening. Hi.
Hi, Jeff. I haven't spoken to you, at least on a show, since probably college. So this is pretty cool.
So let's bring it back for the people. We're both Syracuse University proud graduates, Z89 alumni as well. And I'm pretty sure I remember the first time we ever met, which was, and I'm usually good with faces and names and interactions. We were in the Z89 studios, and you came in to do a sports update. And pardon me when I say this, but because I have a lot of friends in the industry, you don't get a lot of females coming in to do sports updates. So you said, I'm here to do a sports update. And I'm like, all right, cool.
It was a sports update. I also had absolutely zero idea how to use the board. I didn't know how to use anything at Z89, basically. I said, Jeff, I'm going to need your help doing this. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm willing to learn. I think it was my first one ever, and you were a great teacher, so thanks.
Well, I remember that, too. I wasn't going to give myself any credit. I remember you absolutely crushing it on your sports update, and that's how we began a friendship, but it's been so long since we've been able to chat, and you have seen so much success. Last time I saw you was while we were in college, and now you are widely known as the prop queen. I mean, legitimately, how cool is that? You've gone from Cuse to queen. This is huge. So you work with Yahoo Sportsbook, and sports gambling is massive, and the more and more it gets involved and legalized in different states, you are just gaining more and more traction. Have you always been into sports gambling, or is this something you kind of took advantage of the scene and realized where this country and where sports is going?
It's a mix of both. I've always been involved in fantasy sports, yet when I was in local news, everyone was already in fantasy sports. There wasn't really much room to grow in that part of the field anymore. I graduated 2016, went into local news. I always wanted to be a sports broadcaster, just didn't really know what exactly my path was going to be because I was in local news. I could have done sideline reporting. There are so many different things in sports broadcasting. When I left local news in 2019, I was unemployed. I just didn't want to re-sign a long-term contract in North Carolina, knowing that I was not going to be able to move up in that space because my boss was there for 20 plus years as sports director. I ended up going home. I ended up sideline reporting. I was doing minor league baseball in hosting, like in stadium hosting. I wasn't in the betting world yet. I didn't like sideline reporting. I really tried to like it. It just wasn't for me. I didn't like that I prepared so much for a 1 minute hit once a quarter during a football game. I also just am not a storyteller. I know I always tried to tell myself I like that. The truth is, I just love the game. I want to talk about the game, and the way to do that is by doing things like on the radio or like hosting shows where you're able to get your knowledge across to people in more than just a 2 minute time frame like you get in local news. When I saw the sports gambling site SportsGrid pop up on my Twitter through a mutual friend, which I knew it was a mutual friend, so I knew I wasn't going to get murdered going there on the interview because, to be honest, the website looked like you could buy a fake ID off it. Like, it just was something – it just was really sketchy. I'm glad I knew one person. I DM'd I LinkedIn messaged the CEO of the company. I said, you don't have any females here at the Sports Betting Network. I would love to try out, see if it could be a fit. It was in New York City, so it was right in my backyard. Great to be home. It was on-air reps. I always wanted to host shows. I just didn't really know much about betting. I knew fantasy, which is where the props all came in, Jeff. And that's kind of how I eased my way. It was like the gateway drug into the sports betting world, where I focused on props because it was the same handicap as talking about fantasy sports. Then I eventually, it's not that I didn't know betting, I just didn't know how to think like a sharp. I didn't know how to think like one of the smart bettors. I was a very public bettor. Then I learned the lingo better. I learned how to think like the sports books better. That's what I had to really learn a lot of.
That's so interesting because I moved to Las Vegas having no knowledge of not only sports gambling, but gambling in general. I mean, I was just
Are you a
little.
degenerate now?
Oh my gosh. My first year, I was I started off with casino degeneracy.
Of course.
I mean, I just was be like, and
What's your game?
Oh, I started off as a blackjack because it's so easy, right?
I love blackjack.
You get the idea, right? 21 hit, and then I got super into the book because everyone's like, oh, what would the book say? So I read the book, right? Like nobody ever actually reads the book, but I was living on my own in Las Vegas, and I was like, it's not that I was thinking to myself, I want to be good at this, but I would go out and I'd go to a concert, and afterwards with friends, we would like throw a couple, some bucks down on a blackjack table, and I'm like, if I'm gonna do this, I want to be decent at it. Like if it's
Especially because you sit at those tables, if you do one move wrong, if you hit on the wrong hand, the person next to you may punch you in the face.
I know, and that was what worried me the most because I am like a connector of people. I love the environment of a blackjack table, and I'm like, I like to talk to people. I like to have fun. But then if I make some idiot move when I'm just chatting up the person next to me, then they're not going to want to talk to me anymore, and it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be social. So I had to learn that. That was, as you say, the gateway into craps, which I had no clue how to play. Now I know how to play. And then my favorite, roulette, which I know. I get that reaction a lot. However, I saw a guy on TikTok, and it changed my life. But it's like...
Maybe I need that because I hate roulette. My grandma tells me to she'll send me with, I don't know, $50, my grandma, if I go to Vegas. She says, okay, put it down on this, this, and this at roulette. It makes me cringe. I hate it.
Well, I'll tell you, it's similar to like I hated it and then I learned about it, kind of like you were talking about with sports gambling. And then I got into sports gambling a little bit because it's such a part of Vegas lifestyle. My co-host in Las Vegas, Amy Thomas, she was always talking about, you taking the over or under, you doing all this. I had literally like speaking Spanish to me. I had no idea. And then I started to learn a little bit more. I started to be about it. And my first time really putting money down was the 2019 Super Bowl, right? Where you do all the fun prop bets and all that fun stuff. And then I got super into it. And then I noticed kind of around the same time that I was getting into it, I was living in Vegas, I saw you on my social media feed, like all of a sudden, you're all about the gambling of sports betting, and especially with your work with MLB Network. If people listening to this podcast don't know, I'm a big baseball fan. As you might imagine, growing up in my household, it was almost impossible not to be. And your work with MLB Network, I mean, I see your face on the big screen at the Circa. I mean, you're like a star now when it comes to the gambling, and like a meteoric rise. I mean, you're telling us that you didn't start this till 2019. You were unemployed in 2019, and now here we are in 2022, halfway through the year, and your face is everywhere. That's pretty cool.
The baseball story, well, the MLB Network story is actually really, really cool. I think you'd appreciate it a lot, especially because of who your dad is. So whenever you get into the business, people always think, who would listen to my show? Especially when you're young, you think, why is anybody going to listen to my show? And you might go to work and mail it in one day because who's listening to you when at the 9 to 12 time frame from 9 a.m. to noon Eastern, I'm on Sirius XM channel 204 on Sports Grid. There are a million morning shows that anybody could listen to, especially someone with the name Matt Vasgersian. Matt Vasgersian, who, for anyone listening who doesn't know, big baseball voice, play-by-play, Angels broadcaster, did ESPN games last year, now MLB Network. He is my co-host on the MLB Network show Pregame Spread. We went to lunch in January to talk with the producers and Matt about the show. I thought my agents just were the ones that reached out to MLB Network and said, hey, we have a good person for you if you want to use her for more betting stuff. I did a little bit of betting stuff with them last year just as a guest on a show. They said, I thought that this was all my agents just saying, no, let's expand on the relationship. No. Matt Vasgersian listened to my Sports Grid show a year before that and listened to it every morning going into work. Matt said that he couldn't believe that the info I was giving out was so just genuine and new and different in the way that I relayed the messages and the way that I talked about the stats. He said he knew I wasn't stealing that info from anywhere. He thought I was entertaining. And he told MLB Network that he wanted me to do the show with him. He was the one that asked. And this was all because Matt Viscursion listened to my show for some reason, scrolling through SiriusXM, came across our gambling network and said, let me listen to what they say about the betting world. And that was it. It was all because of Matty V.
Wow. See, that is like the prime thing that we tell, and we were told when we were students, and now I tell students all the time, there's always somebody listening. I'm sure there were times that you were sitting in the studio and you were thinking to yourself, there is literally nobody out there. Like, who
Jeff,
even
I was
cares?
sitting in my bedroom of my childhood home because it was 2020. We moved back to our home we didn't have home studios yet. I built them during COVID. I was sitting in my childhood bedroom doing a 3-hour morning show. I never thought someone at that level was going to be listening to me.
See, that's the story that so many people don't realize is like in 2020, 2021, 2022, now is the time to get yourself out there, right? Like the only reason why you are doing what you're doing today, the reason why you are the prop queen, the reason why Matt Viscursion noticed you in the first place, the reason why you have any of this success is because you said, all right, when you were down, and you didn't have a ton of money in the pocket, you built a studio, you started a show, you did this, and now look at you. I mean, this is a prime example of it's easier to do it now than ever. You just got to do it and be passionate about it.
It's also all about social media. This is what I tell so many young up-and-coming people in the business. In 2020, when everybody was at home, especially because all the big-time networks couldn't figure out how to get on air, we were really one of the few networks that had any content going out still. What I would do is, first off, we couldn't figure out how to go live yet for our show. We were pre-recording our shows the first 2 months of the pandemic. So from March, April, and then I actually think a little bit of May, we were just pre-recording shows for 2 to 3 hours, editing all of it in post-production, like adding in the commercials, adding in the graphics. I did all of it because I didn't trust anyone else with my show. They could have given me other producers. They said that they would give me someone else to do it, and all I had to do was produce and host the show. I said, absolutely not. I have nothing else to do. I'm going to edit it. And I edited the shows for 3 hours after producing it, after hosting it. Then what I did, because I knew already what was in all the shows, I already knew which parts of the shows were good, I started cutting up the stuff, and I threw it on social media. That's when everything started to blow up, because Till Bet Do Us Part was our best bet segment, and that was the whole shimmy thing that everyone got into. It turned into this just because we had the stinger effect where it had like the ring drop and the graphic, and then we just turned it into a quick 2-minute hit. Posted it every day to social. It started to gain traction because the people were looking for things to do. I mean, there was nothing else. We were betting on golf. We were betting on soccer. We were betting on anything that was on, NASCAR. That's when things really started to blow up, just because we were promoting the show on social.
Yeah, I think that's it's that extra effort that can be so difficult. Like after recording a show, you're exhausted. I know I do a morning show every single day, and like the last thing I want to do is like listen to me do the show. It's like it literally like
same thing.
My own voice sickens me at that point, because I'm like, I'm just done. I'm done with this. But then to go as far as cutting those clips, and that's what I'm seeing, right? Like that's what I'm seeing on social media, and I'm saying, wow, there's something going on there. How can I reach out? How can I learn more about what she's doing? And I'm bored. It's a pandemic. I need something to do. I need something to consume. I mean, my podcast here, Do What You Love, was started and then consumed in a pandemic. And I couldn't be happier for it, because on my radio show, I was only allowed to talk to cool people for like 3 to 5 minutes. And radio is so constricting when it comes to the amount of time we talk and the amount of music I got to play and the amount of commercials I got to play. And even though it's my show and I don't really have a script and I'm able to kind of do what I want, I still work under these constrictions versus being able to do a podcast like this. And I think that you are just a prime example of, and all of this stuff I want people to know listening, like I asked you to be on the show because I didn't know the journey. I didn't know the whole journey. I can only do so much research on a guest, and I had about 1/4 of what you told me because I know that journey was late night hours in your childhood bedroom with your parents probably calling down to you like, honey, dinner's ready. And you're like, hold on. I got to finish editing this. I got to get this done.
Meanwhile, my sister, who, I mean, she was unemployed at the time. She's sitting there milking those checks at the family pool, sunbathing. I think we were making the same amount of money. I'm not joking. I think for those few months that she was getting those checks from the government, we were making the same money. I'm sitting there working like 17 hours a day just for barely anything. I didn't care though. I was so happy to be working. I was so happy that it was working. I mean, the social media stuff started taking off. The show got picked up by Sirius. It got picked up by FanDuel. It was just right place, right time. I also just like going back to the learning of the betting stuff, which like you said, you actually read the book. I listened to so many podcasts before the pandemic. This was 2019, going to and from New York City from my parents' house. Because again, I was just like barely making money and was living home with my parents after living away in North Carolina for 3 years. I go back and forth on that hour and 20-minute train ride, listening to at least 1 to 2 podcasts about sports betting every single day. And I love music, so it was such a sacrifice to not be able to listen to music on those train rides. I just had to learn everything because it's not just about, okay, let me learn sports betting. Every season's a different season of betting. Every season is different for knowing how to bet, what to bet. In hockey, you're betting a puck line. In baseball, you're betting a run line. In football, you're betting spreads, like you're betting like the plus 7.5 spread. So everything is really, really different, which is why until I got 2 times through, so 2019, 2020, 2 times through each season, that's when I started to really feel like I could own the space.
Wow. I am like, the research that it took, the amount of legwork that it took to get you where you are, it's impressive nonetheless. And now I feel truly inspired. And that's what this podcast is about. It's called Do What You Love because you're a great example of just that. And as silly as it sounds, like I don't just willy-nilly ask people on this podcast because I need a guest, right? I wait and I'm patient for the guest to kind of appear to me and say, hey, I'm working my butt off, and that's what this podcast is all about, and you're a prime example of that. I want to stick with this, but I do have a question. In your background, and you can see, I'll add this clip to our social media at Do What You Love JK. You have a baseball. Is it an autographed baseball in the background there? I have to ask who autographed that.
It's actually, you'll appreciate it, the Baltimore Orioles.
Wow.
I forget which team this was. My dad gave it to me. It's just a bunch of Baltimore Orioles players. There's a lot of different signatures on here. So I have that from the Orioles. I have, what else do I have? I have this signed helmet by Alex Rodriguez behind me. A Ravens helmet signed by, I probably shouldn't say, but Ray Rice. And then I have a bunch of pictures. This is a lot of hand-me-down stuff from my bedroom, from my childhood to stack this whole studio. My actual really nice things are still at home. I have a signed used Jeter jersey from my bat mitzvah present. I have, my grandpa got me a really, really cool, it's all the top like center fielders from New York that played in New York. So I have a signed picture of that. So I have a bunch of, my grandpa's a huge collector. I have it on my social media in certain places and on my TikTok, I did a whole thing where you just go through my grandpa's basement. It's a museum. It's really, really cool.
And so I'm curious about this, and I've asked some other sports broadcasters the same question. Have you ever, I don't want to put you on the spot, but run into an issue, because I know you're a New York Yankees fan, you have Yankees displayed. Do people ever call you out like, well, of course you're taking the Yanks, and do ever Boston Red Sox fans get on your case?
Very rarely, because I don't like betting on my own team. I very rarely will bet on my own teams, because even though you are supposed to know your team best, I also just feel like you could see, it's almost like when you love someone, you don't want to see their flaws. That's sometimes where I'm at, or I'm just really superstitious. I'm actually more superstitious than anything. If I were to bet on the Yankees or the Ravens because I don't know if you know, I'm like a diehard Ravens and Yankees fan. It's my dad's from New York. My dad's from Maryland. My mom's from New York. I kind of just split because when I was maybe 10 years old in the early 2000s, come on, what was I gonna do? The Yankees were winning World Series and the Ravens won a Super Bowl. That's just where
Good
my
timing.
allegiance
Very good timing.
is lied. But yeah, so when it comes to all that kind of like betting your own team, I very rarely will do it just because of those reasons.
Well, I think that's good advice for anybody. And somebody once told me very early on to living in Las Vegas, don't bet with your heart. And I regret it immensely because I was at work and I was going to bet for the Syracuse Orange, our basketball team.
Of course.
I want to say this was in 2018. They played Duke at Cameron Indoor, and Duke was the number one team. And Syracuse, like the line was ridiculous, but I wanted to take Syracuse outright. I just had this weird feeling because Syracuse kind of has Duke's number from time to time. And I was going to put like $50, and I don't even remember the odds because it's like, there's always the bet you didn't make that all that. I literally hated people in Vegas who would always say, don't talk about bets you didn't make because nobody cares. I care. And it would have gotten me like, I don't know, some odd like $12,000 if I had put like $50 on it. It was nuts. It was like nuts. And they ended up winning at Cameron Indoor, beating them. It was like, I still hold it over myself. But I mean, if I had won that, God knows I probably would have put all that money in something else.
You would have gone back to the blackjack or craps table. It would have been over.
And it's
It
gone.
would have been over. I don't really love to bet. If I go to the games, then maybe I'll put a little bit on. I bet the Ravens to beat the Chiefs last year when I went to the Ravens-Chiefs game. That was awesome. Mm-hmm. I always talk about hedging your happiness. If I'm going to bet on a game that my team's in, I'd rather bet the other side. This way, if my team wins, I'm not going to be upset that I lost my bet. If my team loses, then I'm not going to be upset or as upset because I won the bet. That's the way that
actually
hedge
really,
your happiness.
That is really genius. Hedging your happiness. I just wrote that down in my notepad to use that because that is pretty smart. And with the way betting is going and the way it's just taking the world by storm. I mean, states and even here, like with my radio station here, the first endorsement that they're thinking about putting me on is with a gambling app. They're like, hey, do you do this? You're from Vegas, right? You do this? I'm like, yeah, sure. Because they're like totally hyping it. Now, I'm, once again, suburban guy from outside DC in Maryland, but I'll ride that Vegas thing anytime. Now
you just sound smart. Now they just assume that you are a sports betting expert because you came over from Vegas.
Well, let's just say, thank God I have your cell phone number in case I have to act like a sports betting expert because I am far from that. Now, I had, I'm not sure how close you are with her, but a fellow Syracuse graduate and sideline reporter for Fox Sports Southwest, I believe, Sarah Maryfield. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She joined the show last year, middle of the pandemic. Sports were just getting back going, and we talked to her a little bit about her career, her job. But I love talking to her and her thoughts on females in sports and females in the sports industry because she all the time has to deal with, quite frankly, idiots on social media who tell her what she's already knows more about than they do. Like, just how do you deal with trolls on the internet, whether they're talking about you being a female in sports or not? I mean, there's a lot of people who give me crap all of the time for whatever they want, whether it's about my voice, whether it's about my heritage, whether it's about, anything at all. How do you deal with trolls on the internet?
I don't pay attention to them. I don't give them any kind of attention because if you do in the Twitter algorithm, then it'll keep popping up on people's feeds, and I just don't want them to have that. Now, there are certain times where you'll get the occasional person that says, I'm not going to listen to a female talk about baseball because she never played professional baseball, or I'm not going to listen to her because she never played professional football. If we took majority of broadcasters, how many of them played professional sports? Very little. How many of them even made varsity on their high school team? Probably not many of them. That's why we're all sports nerds, because we studied the game because we couldn't play the game. I also, the thing with betting, which is different from what Sarah Maryfield does as a sideline reporter, in the sports betting world, the thing I love about it is it's such a different entity. If you take a sports handicapper out of Vegas and put him up against a former NFL player and said, let's go for 10 bets, who's going to win more of them, I would put my money on the sports bettor, because that's what they do for a living. They're handicappers who make millions of dollars a year just on bets. I know some of these top-notch handicappers who don't even watch the sport. They just know the numbers. They bet numbers, and they are millionaires. It has nothing to do with knowledge of the sport sometimes in sports betting. Whereas if you're a sideline reporter, you better know what sport you're talking about, or else people are going to tell you. Obviously, for what we do, like for what I do in hosting shows, I do have to know the sport, because especially on live television, you're going to get questions and you need to be able to answer them. If you're just strictly looking to bet, you don't need to know the sport. That's what's so interesting about sports betting, and why I laugh a lot at these trolls on the internet. Because, okay, don't listen to me. You don't have to if you don't want to. I'm not telling you to follow me on Twitter. You chose to follow me on Twitter. Then you look at their picture and there's no avatar there. It's just a blank face. Why do I care what those people have to say? I don't. I have really thick skin. I live in New York. I grew up in New York. In this business, you just have to be able to be confident in yourself. If you believe in yourself, and I have to applaud sports betting for giving me that confidence, then you'll be okay. The hardest lesson I had to learn out of college was feeling like I belonged. Not just as a female, it was because of my age. I was so young. I was 21 years old covering the Carolina Panthers. I was looking around that stadium on the field. I'm thinking to myself, these people are 45, 50 years old. They've been covering the Panthers for 20 years. Or there's ESPN, there's NFL Network. Do I deserve to be here? I'm 21 years old. That was really hard for me, because if you don't portray yourself as confident on air, then people don't believe you. Once you get confident on air, I learned this so early on in local news. It's all about, can I curse? Am I allowed to curse on here?
Yeah, you can curse. Feel free.
It's all
please.
about bullshitting. This whole business is bullshit. If you learn how to bullshit on live television, live radio, then as long as you do it with confidence, people could believe you too. So, and not that everything I say is BS. That's not what I'm saying. But the point is that you have to do everything with confidence, and eventually then people will believe you. I didn't have all that confidence in local news because I just wasn't confident in my sideline reporting ability. I wasn't confident in reading highlights necessarily. I was so young. Now in sports betting, because not many people were in it by the time that I jumped in it, I just felt this wave of confidence that I knew more than most people did about the space that ended up filtering into all my on-air work too. And that's what I think is important, is just being confident in yourself. If you're confident in yourself, then very rarely will people come after you.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point, which is, I think the saying, fake it till you make it, kind of gets a bad rap. Because when I started hosting a morning show in Cleveland, I was 21 years old, and I was not at all enough qualified to be there. So I was working as hard as I could, asking as many questions as I could, but faking it until I actually made it, so that other people who are not in the building that I'm in, I'm learning from these veteran broadcasters. I'm trying to do, and then when I go on the air, I'm going to fake it until I make it, because they don't know what it's like to actually push the buttons and talk on a microphone and tell a story to an entire city. I know, and the broadcasters around me know, so I can fake it until I make it, as long as I'm not cocky about the fact that, okay, I don't know everything. So when you were covering the Carolina Panthers, and you see guys who've been covering it since they were 18 and they're 58, you think to yourself, okay, I'm not better than him, but I can do all that I can and learn from these people and get to my level or his level of degree as soon as possible, but I'm going to fake it till I make it.
Exactly. Learning so much from the people around you, saying yes to literally everything so that you get all those opportunities, you get the different reps in. That was super important too. It also, and I was saying this to you before, in the local news world, what I didn't love was that you only get your 2 to 5 minutes. The same way you were saying sometimes on radio, you only get to interview people for a really short amount of time. That's why I always knew I loved talk show radio, because whenever I did that once a week in North Carolina, I absolutely loved it because I was able to showcase my knowledge. A lot of people who would watch me on the local news said that they actually gained more respect for me after listening to me on the radio. They heard that I actually had more knowledge of the game than they thought I did, because when you're just squeezing highlights into 2 to 5 minutes from the local high school games, you're not really showcasing your knowledge. You're trying to get every kid's name in there so that their parents aren't mad that you left their name out. When like being able to be on radio, being able to have shows, that's why I don't get as much criticism as other people may, because I give at least 3 nuggets for every bet that I give out. If that bet doesn't hit, people are like, oh my gosh, I don't know how that didn't hit. It hit in 5 of his 6 games against these teams, or blah, 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 blah. Like, there's so many different stats. They can't believe that the bet didn't hit. That's why I love the sports betting space, because I could just showcase my knowledge. I give out info. You know that I did my research because I go into every single show very well researched. If you don't want to listen, don't listen. I don't care. I'm just saying that it's very different, because it's not just 1 minute of work. It's an hour or 30 minutes, whatever it is, that I'm going on shows and I'm giving out all this information to back up what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think the way you talk about radio makes me really, really happy, because in an industry, in a world where so many people think that, us 20-something-year-olds are not interested in radio anymore and not interested in that format, I'm like, radio is way closer to podcasting than the Spotifys of the world, the, Pandoras of the world. I was like, I can get my music anywhere. Well, it's like, okay, yeah, I work for a music station, but you can't hear my stories. You can't hear my life. You can't let me interview your favorite artist. That makes a big, big difference. So for you to say that, people gain more respect for you in, 15-minute radio interview versus a 2-minute hit, the unfortunate truth, and I've talked to news anchors and news reporter buddies of mine, the unfortunate truth is they don't understand, the masses don't understand how hard it is to put together a 2-minute package on the local government, right? You got to shoot it, you got to edit it, you got to put it together. Writing concisely is something that's not very easy. Professor Hub Brown quoted Mark Twain on my first day of sophomore year at Syracuse University and said, Mark Twain once wrote that I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write you a short one. It's always more difficult to speak concisely and do it in a time constraint than to just blab on. The point is, people don't know that, and people don't appreciate that. But when they hear you be able to talk for 30 minutes on my podcast, right, they know what you're talking about. They get that you're a person behind there, that you have more knowledge than just the 2 minutes you got to throw up there, or even those social media clips you're throwing. You're loading as much information and packing a punch into those clips. But if they come to your product, they come to your show, if they see you on MLB Network, they really get a full force of what you can do and what you know. And I think that's using that social media to engine and push people to your big product. That's where it's at. I love that you love radio. That made me so happy. You don't even know.
I love it. You also could just show so much of your personality when you're on radio or a simulcasted show. Anything that's longer than a 3-minute hit, a 5-minute hit. It's just about being on talk shows. Having the ability to showcase who you are, I think, is so important, especially in today's world. People want to be able to relate to you.
Yeah, and being a communicator means you got to be a good writer. You got to be able to write a 90-second script for sure. But also, to think on your feet, it's going to make everybody a much better broadcaster. I had my buddy Max Darrow co-host with me when my co-host was on maternity leave, and he was like dumbfounded the amount of freedom I had. I was like, yeah, we can go here for like 3 minutes. We'll talk about whatever. And he's like, so, like, what are we talking about? And I was like, oh, we should talk about this. Like, we just went to that bachelor party together. Here are kind of some bullet points we should hit, but let's go. And he's like, oh, okay. And he was fantastic. Don't get me wrong.
He's great. Max is great.
Max is amazing. And now he's in San Francisco, in his hometown, being a news reporter, just crushing it. But he was just like, and I could never do what he does on a daily basis, dealing with the stuff he has to deal and the deadlines he has to deal with. God bless him. But he did appreciate, oh my gosh, the freedom we have, the amount of personality we can show. You know, he's never had an opportunity to talk about.
That's why I couldn't do news. I couldn't do news like that. They have to show, they have no personality. They have to be serious for the most part. I couldn't do it. I can't also, when they anchor the news and they go from a death to something happy to a death to something happy. I just want to be happy. I just
Yeah.
want to be in a workplace that makes me happy. And I come on every day, and you probably feel the same way. The best part to me about this business, especially now that past the pandemic, I get to go in studio, which has helped so much because being remote like made me want to go insane. Being able to be on air, though, even when I'm remote, you've got to put that smile on your face. Even on radio, you have to put a smile on your face when you speak, because if you don't, you will hear that in your ear. You will hear it back. If you listen to your radio show, if you're not smiling, you sound dead. I have to do the same thing, whether it's radio, whether it's TV. I love that when I come to work, no matter how bad of a morning I had, no matter how bad of a week I have to make the people watching feel good because they're listening to sports and that's their outlet. They want to have fun with it. I need to be a happy and positive person. That's what I think is great about our jobs.
Oh, I completely agree. Gosh, you have been so much fun. I've taken so much of your time. I could literally do 5 hours with you, but tell the people where they can find you and how they consume more of your amazing personality, but also your incredible knowledge of sports betting. Tell the people where they can find you.
On Twitter at Ariel Epstein is where I post most of my sports betting picks. I also post a lot to Instagram at Ariel Epstein. Then I have Yahoo Sportsbook on Twitter, sports.yahoo.com. Also, the MLB Network show is 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday, except we're not going to have a show until the Friday after All-Star break now. We're all on a little bit of a break before the break. So make sure to check out Pregame Spread, though, 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern time on MLB Network.
And she's pushing 50,000 Twitter followers, folks.
So close. My mom's going to be so excited.
Are you going to... I would not judge you if you got a 50K balloon because you deserve it. You work hard for those followers. I'm serious. You work really hard and the research shows. That's Ariel Epstein, everybody, joining Do What You Love. Thank you so much for being my first guest back in quite a few weeks because of the move across the country. I just got married, so this is exciting for me. And Thank you again for joining us. I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me on. Honestly, it's an honor to be on your podcast. I really, really enjoyed it.